You season 4. Everyone's pulling for Joe Goldberg, and the guy is literally a serial killer.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, I'm Skyler.
I'm Gary.
And this is the Nerds Inc. podcast. So, Gary, today we are talking about why are you so obsessed with movie villains? I've been wanting to know this for a while. I'm sure our listeners want to know as well. So I'm excited to talk about this. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm excited for this one. We kind of pushed this back, 2 weeks in a row? Thanks to James Gunn and Peter Safran deciding in the middle of January is when they wanted to drop that DC news. But I'm excited about this too. How about you?
Yeah, I am. Like I said, I've been wanting to kind of get to the bottom of this, pick your brain about it. I thought it would be a great thing to talk about on the pod today. So let's go ahead and dive right in. First question I have for you, my friend. When did you first realize the bad guys were dope?
I have to say it goes all the way back to when I was watching Static Shock, honestly. Probably one of the best villains ever written, Ebon. He was funny, charismatic, but not only that, he had an air about him. You know, he wasn't the most powerful metahuman on there, but people knew not to cross him. He'll send him to the Shadow Realm in a heartbeat.
Okay, good point. All right. And what is it about a good villain that you find compelling?
So that's hard, but that is a really good question. To me, it's really three things. One, I always mention this, is charisma. When it comes to a good villain, they have to have a charismatic presence. You see it in all the great villains, Voldemort, Thanos, Loki. And for those of you who may have seen Ant-Man, Kang. And then also mentioning Ebon and so many other villains. They have, when they walk in a room, people know. They don't even have to say anything, but they know. So that's one. Two, I think the thing that I love the most about specifically Thanos, and as people will see in the future movies with Kang, they have a humanized aspect about them, but they're not sympathized. You can understand where they're coming from. With Thanos, everyone understood, hey, he dealt with losing his entire world, even though he had a plan on how to save it. May not have been the best plan, may not have even been the smartest plan, but he had a plan on how to save them. And because they didn't listen, he was just like, okay, this is what happens. And so now he wants to take that plan, which again, may not even have been the best plan or the smartest plan, but he took that plan and he enacted it. And that's something I really love to see, is, someone who has a vision, has a goal, and it's like, okay, I get it, And then finally for me, has to be action. Seeing Thanos come out and just put that 3-piece and a biscuit on Hulk, legendary scene. And then him just going through the entire Avengers roster and just putting hands to him was just great.
Yeah, no, that scene to open Infinity War and he just wrecks Hulk. I don't think anybody was expecting that, and to see that on screen, it was freaking intense. Right.
I think the funniest thing was when the meme came out where it's I've never seen someone beat somebody into submission like that. I think it was I've never seen someone beat someone peaceful. That was funny. But
literally,
what makes a good villain to you? I'm intrigued to hear your point of view.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on a lot of it, and it actually kind of goes into my next question for you. But really, how compelling are they? Is a villain fully realized? Are they fleshed out? Mm-hmm. I think of, Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs, when Anthony
Legendary.
Hopkins played that role. It was so compelling, and like everybody wanted to go see that movie. I mean, not just for Jodie Foster, but just because of Anthony Hopkins' performance. And it was just powerful. Got all the Oscar buzz and stuff, and he was playing a serial killer.
Yeah.
So I think like that's just like a prime example, because just really expanding beyond the comic book movie realm. I think of even with TV shows nowadays, one of the shows I'm currently watching that's on season 4, part 1 just dropped, as I mentioned, a few weeks ago in our episode, but, season 4, everyone's pulling for Joe Goldberg, and the guy is literally a serial killer.
Yeah.
And a stalker. And, Penn Badgley, the actor who plays him, had to come out after season 1 and be like, can you guys stop romanticizing me, please? Because like all the girls, even Millie Bobby Brown was kind of criticized for like going on. They're like, I feel for Joe. I believe him. And, he's the one that I want to pull for. It's like, oh, he's doing what he can for the one he loves. And it's like, no, he's killing people and he's a stalker, and that's extremely toxic. But, at the same time, there is something really compelling about him. And I think there is something to be said about really compelling characters, whether they're heroes or villains. But specifically with villains, is like we all kind of have that dark side to us and the far reaches of our minds, a lot of impulses and urges that we never act on. And then so we get to see it on screen, or we get to see it in a video game. And I think that that's what really draws us in. So, same reason as you, just how compelling are they? Do we have a fleshed out backstory? Are they doing what they're doing for, I guess, the right reasons? Although I guess that's, to a rational person, it might not always seem like the right reason, but
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback on that, I think one of the best things about villains is it kind of makes us appreciate the hero just a little bit more sometimes. I think about how, and it's hard to not use this consistently because of the huge impact that it's had. But the way that Infinity War and Endgame was really just setting up how Thanos was in the MCU and how they used him, it made us appreciate Tony Stark's death a little bit more. It made us appreciate Natasha Romanoff's death just a little bit more. And it also made us appreciate the arc that Captain America went on to end that as well. So a good villain always, in my opinion, gives us the opportunity to appreciate our heroes just a bit more than we probably would if they didn't have such a good villain.
Exactly. And it's not always their physical prowess, right? Like you think of like Bane is a decent villain for Batman, but you also love that psychological aspect that even Thanos had on the Avengers, and the lengths that they had to go to stop him. Like literally the stakes could not have been higher. Like half of the population on Earth was wiped out of all living things. So, I mean, those were incredibly high stakes. And then to actually see them lose, I think what's also really compelling about a villain is like if they defeat your hero is not just like one punch man and like knocks him out in one hit, KO, OP, but he actually defeats the hero. Then how do you see the hero bounce back, or the heroes bounce back? Right. And I think that's what's always really exciting to see too, because, in our daily lives, struggles come up, we go through stuff, and I think it's really nice to be able to see how not just heroes but protagonists, how can they rebound from falling down and getting knocked down,
Exactly. I completely agree with that.
And so kind of going into what I kind of touched on a little bit, do you think that villains can be more compelling than heroes?
I think so. And I want to use an example that's not necessarily from Marvel or DC. And this is going to probably surprise some people because of how I talk about the movies. But I take Shaw from the Fast and Furious franchise. I think he's way more compelling than any of the protagonists in that franchise. I really enjoyed him in, was it 7 and 8 of the Fast and Furious franchise? He was really compelling. So I think they can be. But then I also think about how I want to go back to Marvel for this one. In Iron Fist, I'm going back and rewatching the Marvel Netflix shows. But in Iron Fist, the villain was technically Harold, but theoretically it was the Hand. Neither one was that compelling to me. And as I rewatch it, like the show is much better than I gave it credit for in the past, but the villains are still lackluster. Like, I don't understand Harold's motivation. Like, what does he want? They try to establish that he wants to live and, be with his kids, but that's not really shown well. Again, also, what is the Hand's motivation? What do they want? What are their driving goals? As you and I both know, having gone through different classes, me for screenwriting and you for acting, one of the biggest things that is talked about when it comes to creating stories, when it comes to making movies and TV is, every person having a goal and a motivation for what they're doing. When it comes to writing, it's all about your protagonist having a goal and your antagonist having an opposing goal. And that has to meet somewhere, some way to cause the friction, to cause the climax eventually. And if that's not there on either side, then it causes the entertainment to drop. So if the villain has lackluster goals or motivations, they won't be as compelling, which will cause the overall product to be kind of bad.
No, absolutely. And I'm actually really glad that you brought up motivation. So for those listening that don't know, I actually used to teach an intro to acting class when I was in graduate school. And that's really acting 101 right there is what's your motivation? What's your objective in a scene, in a story, in a script? What's your super objective, right? Kind of that overarching goal for your character. These are all such important things. And I think the real hallmark of a good villain is how well are they fleshed out in that script. And then, of course, you have to have the right casting. You have to have the right actor that can actually embody that and really dig deep for that. Because I think it's really easy for villains to just be these unlikable characters that, have those punchable faces, punchable voices. You're like, they annoy me so much. I just want to beat them up, right? And there is something to be said about an actor who can actually develop that villain into something that, once again, that people care about. Obviously using Marvel as a clear example, because we love to use them as examples, but, Loki, right? Like Loki, let's be honest, Tom Hiddleston, what he's done with Loki is far more compelling than anything that Chris Hemsworth has done with Thor. And that might be a hot take for some people because Thor is like this amazing hero, and he is. But Loki is way more compelling. I mean, so compelling that they did, a spin-off show with him, and they're already getting ready to come out with season 2 this year. And I think that says a lot because I can guarantee you if Tom Hiddleston had not done great with that role, if the writing wasn't great for that role, or he wasn't as likable in the films, there's no way he would have had a spin-off show because that's such like a obscure character, and now he's become one of the most popular villains. Or I guess he's more of an anti-hero now. Yeah,
he's an anti-hero now for sure. And I want to touch on that because that's a great example. Because honestly, if you go back and watch the first Thor movie and you watch the second Thor movie, the only thing really that interesting about those movies was Loki. You had some people who liked Thor, but it wasn't like a like of Thor like people liked Iron Man and everything. They just I guess they may have just liked him just because of how powerful he was. But he wasn't really that much of a likable character. He didn't really have that many compelling scenes. And to me, he didn't really have strong motivations for what he did. In the first Thor movie, his whole goal was, I want to be the king and I'm destined to be the king. And it's like, that was what he was driving towards, but you didn't really get to see anything else outside of that. And then he got humbled and he became more, I guess, human in a sense. But all of that was centered around how his interaction was with Loki. And that's the thing. That's what makes Loki so compelling. And is why since 2011, when the Thor movie came out, everyone in Marvel and everyone in the general populace has fallen in love with Loki. And it's why he also has like so many new comic books that have come out since then as well. So I completely agree with everything you just said. There's great, compelling villains have that. Honestly, the way we kind of talk about in football with quarterbacks, they have that it factor.
Absolutely. And, once again, to kind of touch on casting plays such a crucial role in that, because
Yeah.
I think of even before comic book movies really started to take off at the end of the 90s into the early 2000s. You had these great action movies or these great thrillers.
Yes.
I mentioned Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal Lecter, but I also think of the movie Heat with Al
Throwback.
Pacino, Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer. Yeah, I mean, going to throwback, before we had comic book movies and we could rely on these obvious, comic book villains, you had casting where they would develop this action movie, this thriller, and they would cast like these big name actors in these roles, and you were like, oh, this movie's got Al Pacino. Al Pacino's playing the detective. Robert De Niro is the bank robber. Oh, hell yeah, let's go see this.
Yes.
And that's literally what it was, and that was the draw. And obviously you still have that name recognition today. Like, if a movie comes out, once again with Jonathan Majors as Kang, like that's an immediate draw for people that want to go see Ant-Man on top of it being in the MCU. And then he's also kind of playing a villain in Creed 3.
Yes.
So like these are like reasons we want to go see the movie. It's not always like, sometimes you don't even know who the character is. You don't even know what the story is. A movie
Right.
like Heat, when it came out, that's a one-off type of film. No one could have even predicted what it would be about, but you knew who the actors were and you were
Right.
all for it. And that also kind of circles back to the whole, movie star talk that we had. But,
Right.
no, it's so true. And everybody loves a good bad guy.
They do, whether they want to realize it or not.
Right. And so my next question for you, my friend, because I want to know, are you secretly a villain?
Well, since you asked, I have to say no. Unfortunately, I am currently an anti-hero, going back to my hero phase. But honestly, if I ever did go into acting, I would want to be a villain. It's kind of how some actors get tired of being typecast. I wouldn't want to fall in that category of being typecast as a hero. I would want to definitely dabble into being a villain. I think that would be fun.
But what if you're typecast as a villain?
I'll take it. As long as the roles are good.
No.
I'll say.
Absolutely. No, I will say, as someone, like, obviously my acting experience is primarily in theater and on the stage, but I was just like that, man. Like, I would get a role and I'm like, okay, I'm playing someone's dad again or something like that. And that's one thing. But then you get like a really good, villain / antagonist role in a show. No matter what it is, whether it's film, TV, or theater, like you have so much that you can really dig and dig into. And I had so much fun doing that. I think of my grad school experience. I got to play Roy Cohn in Angels in America Part 1 at the end of my first year. And that was like my first like real big like villain role. And I say villain, but obviously he's one of the antagonists of the story.
Right.
And it's not a linear story by any means, and there's kind of multiple stories developing for those that are familiar with the play. Brilliant play. Part 1 and Part 2 are each 3 hours apiece. It's a 6-hour long debacle if you do both parts. We only did Part 1.
Okay.
But playing Roy Cohn was honestly some of the most fun I've had on stage, and honestly some of the most some of like the biggest deep dive that I've gotten to do into character work. And it was because of that reason of like, I wanted him to be compelling and I had this backstory for him. And obviously a lot of it's revealed in the script and the fact that he was a real person. So yeah, kind of going back into that, it's a lot of fun. So I think any actor who ever gets the chance to play a villain, like, that the stakes are even higher for you. Honestly, into your character work and the backstory that you create, there's just so much more meat on the bone, so to speak.
Right. That's completely accurate. And it actually brings up a question I have for you. You mentioned how you played really more of an antagonist rather than a villain in the play. So I want to know, because oftentimes I feel like the words are used interchangeably. What is the difference between an antagonist in a story and a villain?
That's a good question. And I guess the short answer is there's not much of a difference, in my opinion. When you think of villains, and at least people that kind of study scripts in general, whether that's for theater or film, you kind of look at a villain and who's classified as that does seem more of the kind of comic book, fantasy, sci-fi route, where it's very easy to just classify as like, oh, this is a villain. Mm-hmm. Whereas an antagonist is kind of working against the protagonist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are the opposing force to a protagonist, which a protagonist in this instance would be like a hero, right?
Right.
So when I think of an antagonist, I think of, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a person. So I think that's the main difference, is like a villain is actually a singular person, or they're a group of this group of villains for this story. An antagonist could be societal forces. An antagonist could be, the police. An antagonist could be, government. It could literally be some type of opposing force working against that protagonist. So at least, that's kind of like my interpretation of it. For those listening, you might have a different opinion, and we'd love to hear it. But so I definitely think of an antagonist can be more than just a person or a thing, or like a creature, a monster. It could be more than that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. The first thing that came to mind as you were kind of giving your example, I think of Wakanda Forever. Wakanda Forever had a main villain, and then they had an antagonist. Personally, I look at the CIA and the American government and the governments of the world as the main villain of the movie, because they really set everything in motion with what they did. And they were the main ones really opposing both Wakanda and Talokan. But then I look at Namor and the Talokan army as kind of like an opposing force. Like they're the ones that are headbutting due to the external forces of the governments of the world and everything. So that was really like the first example I thought of when you brought that up, and I completely agree with your definition of it.
Yeah, and to use kind of another example of like anyone who's ever seen The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith and his son Jaden, great movie, but there's no clear villain or antagonist of that. The antagonist is like poverty, societal, inequalities, loss of opportunities, things like that. Things that are kind of taken away from you. That's the antagonist. Antagonist can sometimes just be society and what you live in, and kind of those opposing forces. Because I think some of like these Oscar-worthy films that get all the buzz that maybe not everybody gets to see, as we've kind of touched on before, a lot of the time it's not a person. And a villain is very much some type of entity, some type of physical being that's there to just wreak havoc. All right, Skyler.
So before we, did you have any other questions before I jump into the next parts? I got one more thing I wanted us to do.
Oh, okay. No, yeah, go ahead.
All right. So, next, I wanted to talk about what we are currently watching or reading or playing. What do you recommend for people to jump into if they haven't done already?
Good question. I'm so glad you asked. So it's always fun when we get to wrap up the episodes with these, because these are just really great suggestions for people to check out if you're not already currently engaged in a show or a game or something. Two movies I saw a couple weeks ago. One movie I know was on your list of most anticipated, top 5. I got to see Megan and loved it. We can, of course, do a separate pod, just kind of like reviewing it later, and I would love to do that.
Oh, for sure.
But just to kind of briefly touch on it, I definitely think that it's worthy. Like it's like kind of almost a modern interpretation of Chucky, but I think it's even better because I don't know, Chucky was a little bit too campy for me, whereas like Megan, I feel like has a good balance of kind of the campiness, the horror elements, the downright ridiculous, humorous elements. It kind of juggles all of that very well. And the fact that it kind of dabbles into the idea of AI and what AI can do, I think is really neat. So highly recommend Megan. After that, I also saw Barbarian, which I know that Barbarian came out last year. And I know it's currently on HBO Max. And Barbarian was intense.
I've heard about it.
So it has the same kind of like shock value as the movie Midsummer, if anyone's ever seen that with Florence Pugh. it's like you go into that movie blind. Don't look it up on IMDb. Don't Google it. Just go and watch Barbarian. If you're okay with watching a horror thriller, do that. But it is such a shocking movie. Like I didn't know what to expect, and that was like the best experience for me. So definitely recommend Barbarian. It's got, of course, Bill Skarsgård in it. And Justin Long, which we love Justin Long, a highly underrated actor. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, recommend that. And then last but not least, I am thoroughly enjoying my first run-through of Hogwarts Legacy. I know that was on my most anticipated video games for 2023, and it's living up to the hype. I mean, I definitely want to talk about that as its own separate episode when you get to play it, Gary, because I know you haven't gotten it yet. But God, it's everything. Like me growing up a big Harry Potter fan, once again, to kind of be able to open world explore the Wizarding World is amazing. You get to explore every ounce of the castle, every ounce of the surrounding grounds, Hogsmeade, and the world itself is huge. Like the map itself is so much bigger than you expect.
Nice.
You get to create your character from scratch. And the level of detail that the creators and developers put into this game is quite remarkable. So I'm only about 21, 22 hours in total since I got it at an early release. About 50%, about 45% completed. I'm doing a bunch of side quests right now, and yeah, it's just so much fun. It's literally one of those kind of games where you don't want to put it down.
Yeah.
So if you haven't gotten it already, I'm sure you've seen advertisements for it everywhere because WB is mass marketing this. But definitely pick up a copy of Hogwarts Legacy, PS5, PC, Xbox Series. I know it's getting ready to come out with the later generations like PS4 and Xbox One. Those are coming out in April, I believe.
I think it's March.
Oh, March. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of those two, but definitely pick yourself up a copy. It's worth it. Even if you're just a casual gamer, it's endless amounts of fun. It's worth every penny for sure.
Yeah. I've been hearing so much about it. I'm excited for it.
Like I said, you got to get your hands on it. What are you listening to, watching, enjoying right now?
So I've been really heavy on a comic binge, I'll say for like the last month or so. I just recently read Photon issue 1 that came out last month. For those of you who don't know, Photon is Monica Rambeau. She is going to be in the upcoming Marvels movie that comes out in November of this year. It was so good, honestly. They had a Spider-Man cameo. They had a Doctor Strange and Wong cameo. If you love reading comics, the artwork is beautiful. High recommend. And honestly, it's not a short read, but it's so entertaining that you'll read through it pretty fast. I think they're working on issue 2 and it should come out within the next month or so. So, if you have a subscription or anything, hopefully you add that to your subscriptions. TV, movie wise, I haven't really watched much new things lately. I have watched, or been trying to keep up with The Last of Us. That show is so good, honestly.
It really is.
It made me go back and play the games because I never played the games, and the games are good. I've only played like maybe 15 or 20 minutes of the game so far because it's just been like stupid busy lately. But yeah, it's fun. Like the game is fun. The movie or the game and the show are so eerily similar. It's refreshing because, as we all know, for those of us who love video games, whenever a video game, movie, or TV show comes out, those are typically not that good. But this one definitely breaks that mold. I would put The Last of Us in that category, like with Sonic the Hedgehog, because it's that good. But yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's what's so beautiful about it, right? Is that how many faithful video game adaptions do we get? So it's really nice.
I agree. And it almost gives me some hope for the Mario movie that comes out later this year.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm really, really worried about that movie.
I'm worried about it too, man. It's really just the voice, the voice acting. It's like they could have done so much better.
And don't get me wrong, I love me some Chris Pratt. Obviously know him from his Parks and Rec days, and he's hilarious. But as Mario, I never really agreed with that casting myself personally. But we'll see. I mean, Jack Black is playing Bowser, so that alone is definitely worth checking out.
Right. So but yeah, that's my recommendations for this week. Maybe we'll be able to get into the recommendations next week as well, because I think we're going to be talking Oscars. This is another one we've been kind of putting off for a while.
Yeah. But you know, the important thing is we're getting that in before the actual Oscars, which is the important
right. We got
so. Yeah. So as like a little sneak peek, as Gary was mentioning, everyone, we are going to be talking Oscars and kind of the movies that we want to check out that we might not have already seen. Maybe bring up some movies that we have seen that are nominated. For anybody that's a big Oscar fan or award show season fan, the Oscars are really the pinnacle of cinema as far as award shows go. Obviously, you have the Golden Globes, you have the Emmys, and stuff for television and film, but the Oscars are something special. I usually try to watch them every year. I don't always get to see the movies every year, but I think this year I'm really making it a pointed effort to try to see as many of the ones that look good as I can.
Yeah, I definitely want to watch a lot of the ones that show up for the best movie category, just because I feel like a lot of times these movies that get nominated are those ones that really just have some really tight scripts. And as someone who's trying to, break in as a screenwriter, seeing how they play out on screen and then going back and reading those scripts, is just kind of key. And so I want to take as much inspiration as possible.
Absolutely. All right. So, as always, everyone, I'm Skyler.
And I'm Gary.
And this is the Nerds Inc. podcast. We'll see you guys next week.
Y'all have a good one.